today we're going to be looking at some listener-submitted material all about learning English through listening. And I have to say, even for me, like looking at this stuff, some of this is really, really interesting. So, yeah, I'm really excited to jump in.
Yeah, me too. A lot of people think about like textbooks and, grammar when it comes to like language learning. But these sources really make a good case for listening as being like a superpower.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's a superpower. Like, it's more than just words, right? It's like the sounds. I think one of the sources talked about, like, a woman learned how to order a cappuccino correctly just from listening.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
It is. It really is.
it's like, it seems so basic, but it really does highlight something pretty amazing.
It does. It really does highlight that, like, when we listen to language, especially in real life context, like, our brains are doing so much more than just like translating words. We're picking up on all those like little cues about pronunciation. You know how native speakers emphasize certain syllables,
Right.
or connect words together?
Right.
It's like our ears become finely tuned instruments.
So it's not just like what's being said, but like the music of how it's said.
Exactly.
The soundscape of it all.
Yeah, the soundscape. And think about it, like, we all learned our native language through listening first as babies. Like, we spent months just taking in all the sounds around us before we could even utter a word.
Right.
And these sources suggest we can tap into that same ability as adults.
That makes a lot of sense. But I've always kind of wondered if just like passive listening is really enough. Like, shouldn't there be like more active effort involved?
Oh, that's a great question. And actually, the sources address that. They argue that even passive listening has a powerful impact on our brains. It's kind of like, think of like a spy subtly gathering intel. They may not be actively, engaging in conversations, but they're absorbing all that information from their surroundings, just kind of like being there.
Okay.
In the same way, when we expose ourselves to language through podcasts, music, or even just like everyday conversations, our brains are constantly picking up on patterns and building connections.
So even if I'm not like sitting down with flashcards or anything like that, just having English playing in the background while I'm cooking dinner or something, that's actually like
Absolutely.
it's helpful.
Absolutely. It's like laying the foundation for more active learning. And the sources even provide some really fun and creative methods to take that passive listening a step further.
Oh, okay. Now you've really got me intrigued. What are these fun methods? Because, sometimes language learning can feel like a chore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, these are anything but a chore. One of them is called the talking parrot game, where you mimic native speakers. And actually, the source uses this clip from Harry Potter, which, by the way, Harry Potter is excellent for language learning in general. But there's this one clip where Hermione corrects Ron's pronunciation of a spell.
Oh, I remember that scene. It's Leviosa, not Leviosa. Okay.
Exactly.
So, like, mimicking is fun and all, but how does that actually help me speak more naturally?
Yeah, because it's not just about repeating the words. It's about training your ear to hear the nuances of pronunciation. When you like consciously try to match the intonation and rhythm of a native speaker, you start to internalize those patterns.
Oh, so it's like building muscle memory for your tongue.
Exactly. And another interesting method they suggest involves movement, like incorporating movement into your learning. The source gives the example of like, "You are my sunshine," and they encourage listeners to follow along with actions like clapping or pointing, or putting your hand on your heart.
That's interesting. It sounds a bit like those action songs we'll sing as kids.
Yeah.
Yep. How does that translate to learning a language, though?
Well, it taps into a concept called embodied cognition. It's the idea that, like, our physical actions are deeply connected to our cognitive processes. So when we incorporate movement into language learning, we're not just memorizing words, but we're creating like a physical and even an emotional connection to those words.
Oh.
And this can make them much more memorable and easier to recall in real-life situations.
Wow, I'm already seeing how these unconventional methods could actually be really effective. This is definitely not how I learned languages in school. What else do the sources suggest?
Well, one of them talks about learning animal sounds on a farm. It seems silly at first, but think about it. Animal sounds often involve those tricky vowel and consonant combinations. That could be challenging for language learners.
Oh, that's clever. It's like you're turning something potentially frustrating into like a fun game. Like, it reminds me of when I was learning Spanish. I used to watch cartoons in Spanish to pick up new words. Speaking of which, these sources have an even more unusual suggestion. They call it listening to the dead.
listening to the dead.
Now that sounds a little ominous,
Yeah,
but
but it's actually a fascinating approach. What they mean is listening to historical speeches or recordings.
hold on, listening to speeches, how's that supposed to help with everyday conversation?
Well, because these recordings often feature
Yeah.
clear pronunciation
Mm.
and a slower pace, which makes them ideal for language learners.
Oh, right.
It's like slowing down the language,
Yeah.
so you can really catch every nuance.
Okay.
They even mentioned Shakespeare as an example.
Really?
Yeah.
I could see that. I mean, like, I can imagine it would be pretty cool to hear voices from the past.
Mhm. And even if you don't understand every word, focusing on the rhythm and intonation can be a powerful learning tool.
Okay.
It's about immersing yourself in the musicality of the language.
All right, so we've covered some really intriguing techniques here. Passive listening, mimicking like parrots, learning through movement, and even listening to historical speeches. I have to say, I'm feeling inspired. How do we take all this information and turn it into like a practical plan?
Well, that's where the 7-day challenge comes in.
Yeah.
The source lays out this day-by-day plan to incorporate all these listening techniques
Yeah.
into your daily routine. It's like a boot camp for your ears.
A 7-day challenge. Okay, now that sounds like something our listeners can really sink their teeth into.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And it's designed to be fun and engaging, not just a list of tasks to check off.
Okay,
Yeah, like that.
I like that. So tell me more about this challenge. What exactly does it involve?
All right, so day 1 is all about laying the groundwork. The source suggests listening to this entire episode again, but this time with a pen and paper in hand, and just jotting down 3 words that stand out to you, words that you find interesting, amusing, or even just plain weird.
Okay, so it's not just passive listening anymore. It's about active engagement. And it's also about like picking words that like resonate with you personally. That probably helps with memory too, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's about making the language your own.
Yeah.
Then on day 2, things get a little bit more active. The challenge is to listen to the episode again. But this time, every time you hear the word listen, you have to jump up.
Wait, really? Jump up. Okay, that sounds hilarious
Yeah.
and maybe a little bit exhausting.
Yeah.
But I can see how it would like force you to pay attention. It's like a little game to keep your ears on their toes.
Exactly. It
Okay.
turns listening into an active experience. Day 3 is all about sharing the love of language learning. The challenge is 2. Play the episode for the youngest person in your family and teach them at least one new word in English.
Oh, it's so sweet. It's like a little intergenerational
Yeah.
language exchange. Plus, like, teaching someone else is often the best way to solidify your own understanding, right?
Absolutely. And let's be honest, kids are usually way better at picking up languages than adults. So you might even learn a thing or two from them.
Yeah.
Then on day 4, the challenge is 2. Use one of the new words you've learned
Yeah.
in a real conversation.
Okay, now that's where the rubber meets the road. It's one thing to learn words in isolation, but it's quite another to actually use them in a real life situation. Yeah, that takes courage,
It does.
but that's also where the real learning happens, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It's about pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone
Yeah.
and putting those new skills into practice. Day 5 is all about self-assessment. The challenge is to record yourself repeating a sentence from the episode and then listen back to it.
You know, I've always found recording myself to be a bit cringeworthy, but I can see how it would be incredibly helpful for improving pronunciation. It's like holding a mirror up to your own speech patterns.
It is. And sometimes what we think we sound like is quite different from how we actually sound.
Yeah.
So recording yourself can really reveal those subtle areas
Yeah.
where you might need a little more practice. Then for day 6, the challenge expands beyond this episode. The source suggests watching a cartoon in English and jotting down any words that you understand.
Cartoons, that's brilliant. They're engaging, visually stimulating, and they often use simpler language. Plus, who doesn't love a good cartoon?
Exactly.
I remember watching a lot of those growing up.
Yeah, and the visual cues can really help with comprehension as well. It's like having subtitles built into the story.
Right.
And finally, day 7 is all about celebration.
Finally, a reward. I was wondering when we'd get to that.
The source recommends enjoying your favorite treat while reviewing everything you've learned throughout the week. You've earned it.
Absolutely. Celebrating your progress is so important. It helps to solidify the learning, and it keeps you motivated. It's like giving yourself a little pat on the back for all your hard work.
Exactly.
Okay.
And even if you don't complete every single challenge perfectly, that's okay. The point is to experiment, have fun, and discover what works best for you.
You know, this 7-day challenge really does a great job of putting all those unconventional listening techniques into a practical format. It's like a roadmap for transforming your listening skills. I'm curious, the source also mentions experimenting with playback speed. How does that fit into the picture?
That's a great point. Adjusting the playback speed can be a really effective way to fine-tune your listening comprehension.
I've actually never thought of that before. How does that work?
Well, imagine you're listening to a podcast, and there's a particular word or phrase that you just can't quite catch. Slowing down the playback speed to say like 0.75 can give you that extra time to
Sure.
process the sounds and make sense of what you're hearing.
It's like hitting the pause button on a fast-moving conversation.
Exactly.
It's giving your brain a chance to catch up.
And on the flip side, if you're feeling confident and you want to challenge yourself, you can speed up the playback to 1.25 or even 1.5, and this can help you improve your processing speed and train your ear to pick up on information more quickly.
So it's like a workout for your ears, pushing them to work harder
Yeah.
and become more efficient.
Exactly.
I love that.
And the great thing is, most podcast apps and audio players have built-in speed controls these days, so it's really easy to experiment and find what works best for you.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the power of passive listening, to the fun of mimicking parrots, to the challenge of listening to historical speeches. And of course, we can't forget that awesome 7-day challenge. It's clear that listening is more than just a passive activity. It's an active and engaging way to truly immerse yourself in a language.
It's about opening your ears
Mm.
to the music of the language, the rhythm, the intonation, the subtle nuances that make each language unique.
And it's about embracing the journey, having fun with it, and discovering those aha moments that make language learning such a rewarding experience.
You know, as we're talking about this, I'm reminded of something we haven't touched on yet, the emotional connection we forge with a language through listening.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me
Uh,
more about that.
Think about music. Music has this incredible power to transport us to different emotional states, to evoke memories, to connect us with others. And when we listen to music in another language, we're tapping into that same emotional power.
You're right. I've definitely had moments where a song in another language has moved me deeply. Even if I didn't fully understand all the words, it's like the melody and the emotions transcend the language barrier.
Exactly, and that emotional connection could be such a powerful motivator in language learning. When you find yourself truly enjoying the sounds of language, the learning process becomes much more effortless and enjoyable.
So in a way, listening to music in another language is like a shortcut to falling in love with that language.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. It's about opening your heart to the sounds, the rhythms, and the emotions of a new culture.
I love that.
And who knows, you might even discover
Mm-hmm.
your new favorite song in the process.
And it's a reminder that language learning is about so much more than just memorizing words and grammar rules. It's about connecting with another culture on a deeper level through its music, its stories, its people.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll continue our deep dive into the power of listening for language learning. Okay, so we're back and ready to dive even deeper into this whole listening thing. Before the break, we were talking about the emotional connection we can build with a language through music.
Yeah, it's amazing how a song can just transport you.
Mhm.
You know, even if you don't understand all the words, you can still feel the emotion, the vibe.
Totally. And that got me thinking about something else the source material touched on. It talked about how listening can actually help us understand the meaning of words, even if we haven't looked them up in a dictionary.
Right. Like we can kind of deduce the meaning from the context.
Exactly. It's like our brains are constantly making connections, picking up on patterns. So even if we don't know every single word, we can still get the gist of what's being said.
Absolutely. And the more we listen, the more those connections strengthen and the easier it becomes to understand new words and phrases.
Like a snowball effect.
Yeah, exactly. And the sources give this really cool example. They talk about how, like, if you hear the word rain while it's actually raining outside.
Oh, I see. Your brain automatically links the sound of the word with the actual experience of rain.
Exactly. And that creates a much deeper, more meaningful understanding than just memorizing a definition from a textbook.
Makes total sense. It's like learning through all your senses, not just your eyes.
Exactly. It's like a full body immersion in the language.
I love that. So, okay, we've covered a lot of fascinating theoretical ground here, but I know our listeners are eager to put all this into practice, so let's bring it back to that awesome 7-day challenge we were talking about. You left us hanging before the break.
Oh, right. Sorry about that. Got caught up in the the magic of listening, I guess.
No worries. It happens to the best of us.
Mhm.
So remind us, where were we with this challenge?
Okay, so we left off on day 6, which was all about watching a cartoon in English.
Right, right. A fun way to expand beyond just listening to our episode. So what's next? What's on the agenda for the grand finale?
Well, day 7 is all about celebration. The source suggests that you should, enjoy your favorite treat while reviewing everything you've learned throughout the week.
Okay, that sounds like a challenge I can definitely get behind. Treat yourself while reflecting on your progress. I'm in.
You deserve it. You've put in the work, so it's time to savor the rewards. It's a great way to end the challenge on a positive note.
I love it. So, just to recap for our listeners, this 7-day challenge really takes you on a journey, doesn't it?
Right.
From passive listening to active engagement, from mimicking to teaching, from self-assessment to celebration. It's a holistic approach to language learning.
It really is, and it's all about making language learning fun, engaging, and, well, less of a chore.
And who knows, maybe by the end of the challenge, our listeners will have discovered a whole new way to learn and appreciate the English language.
I hope so. It's been amazing exploring all these different approaches with you today.
Likewise. And for our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you tried any of these listening techniques before? What worked for you? What didn't?
Yeah, jump into the comments and share your experiences.
And if you decide to take on the 7-day challenge, let us know how it goes. We're here to cheer you on every step of the way.
Absolutely. Remember, language learning is a journey, not a destination. Enjoy the ride.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Hmm.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the power of listening. And we hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Happy listening. All right, so as we wrap things up here, we've been talking about this 7-day challenge and all these different ways to learn through listening. And I keep coming back to how cool is it that we can learn so much without even actively studying,
Yeah, it's really amazing.
just by exposing ourselves to the language.
Yeah, and I think one of the sources mentioned something about this. They called it effortless acquisition.
Oh, effortless acquisition. I like
Yeah.
that.
Basically, the idea is that
Yeah.
our brains are so good at picking up patterns that we can actually learn a lot
Mm,
just through repeated exposure, even if we're not consciously trying to
mm.
memorize anything.
That makes sense. It's like when you learn a new song, you don't sit down and study the lyrics. You just listen to it over and over again, and
That's true.
eventually it just kind of sticks in your head.
Right, exactly.
And it's
Well,
the same with language.
it's the same with
I
language.
think a lot of times people get so caught up in the rules and the grammar that they forget to just enjoy the process.
Yeah, for sure. Should be fun.
It should be fun.
Yeah, and I think these sources really emphasize that, finding ways to make language learning enjoyable
Yeah,
is key to actually making progress.
I agree. And I think this whole idea of listening as a superpower
Yeah.
really kind of drives that home.
Yeah, so
Right?
oh, we have this incredible tool
Mm.
right at our fingertips, and it's free. All we have to do is open our ears and let the language in.
And the cool thing is, there are so many different ways to do that. Like we talked about podcasts, music, movies, even just eavesdropping on conversations, if you're feeling brave.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the key takeaway here is that it's not about finding the one right way to listen. It's about finding what works for you
Absolutely.
and experimenting and having fun with it.
And enjoying the process.
So to wrap things up, we'd love to hear from you, our listeners. Have you tried any of these listening techniques? What worked for you? What didn't?
Yeah, jump into the comments and share your experiences with us.
And if you're feeling really ambitious, why not try out the 7-day challenge? Let us know how it goes.
We're here to cheer you on.
Absolutely. Remember, language learning is a journey, not a destination.
Enjoy the ride.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the power of listening for language learning. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Happy listening.